Right.
And I try to parse these things out in their original languages. And you find answers every time. I can think back to first events that, at least we know in America, it's the most popular, the idea that modern ufology was actually created by this event, and that's the Roswell event in 1947.
Indeed.
Now, this is a theurgic event, and it's really easy to explain how theurgic it is, because you can take only 3 data points from it. That is, where it occurred on latitude, where it occurred on longitude, and what year it occurred. And every one of those numbers happens to be a function of not only the geometry on Cydonia, Mars, but also focuses on the year 2012. It hits also the numbers that we know as universal constants, what SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, has been looking for decades. These universal constants are exactly what we would assume an intelligence greater than ours, or at least level to ours, would be broadcasting.
Yeah.
Because they don't depend on any language to decipher. Mathematics is universal. So what you see with the Roswell crash is that it occurred at roughly 33 degrees in latitude. What's interesting about that is if you could take the number pi, which mathematicians think is transcendental, which means they think it goes on forever into decimal places. But it's basically 3.14159264. You can plug that into 33. You multiply pi times 33, and you get the longitude, which is 103.67. You can draw little crosshairs, and you can find that's exactly where at least one of these disks that was reported to have crashed in 1947 actually was recovered. And then in addition to that, if you take 103.67, which is the longitude, say, of the crash site, and you multiply that times 19.47, you end up in the date 2018. If you take 103.67 and convert it into what you have, minutes and seconds, in degrees, minutes and seconds when it comes to longitude and latitude, and not just a decimal system. It comes out to 103.40, and that puts you into 2013 when you multiply it times 19.47. 19.47 is just a fractal of the year that this occurred. But at the same time, you realize that 33 is a symbol of a third of something. And then decimal, 100%, 33 would represent a third of it. If you're looking at say a sphere that's divided into 3 parts, like the Earth, you realize that the 3-dimensional object that would do that would be a tetrahedron. If you're looking down from a pole and you actually have had a tetrahedron with one of its vertices touching the pole, you'll see it separating the Earth in 3 perfect segments. If you look at so that you're looking at the axis obliquely, so the axis is straight up and down, you can see that this tetrahedron that's superimposed inside the sphere, which, by the way, the 2 polar opposites of the Platonic solids. You have the sphere, which is the highest form, and the tetrahedron, which is the lowest form. You can't have a shape that has less sides. So anyway, the tetrahedron and the sphere superimposed like this. In a system like we have on the Earth, where 0 is the equator and 90 degrees is where the poles are at, the other vertices of this tetrahedron will touch at 19.47 degrees on the latitude, or the south, depending on where you put the vertices in the South or the North Pole. This is something that Richard Hoagland, in his book Monuments of Mars, covered extensively, because he kept finding this signature in the geometry of the Cydonia monuments itself, and even the location of it on Mars. And then this thing turns up in an event far earlier than anything we've discovered. The Viking, missions to Mars occurred in 76. But in 1947, we have all the components of tetrahedral geometry encoded in this event. And you can take it another step, because we're not just looking at say the mathematics and the geometry of this whole thing. This fits into history, and this fits into theology that is already intact. It's already available to us. Because those numbers show up again and again in the biblical text, in Apocrypha, and outside the Western canon also. They also show up in Asian works. You find it in the Popol Vuh. You find it in the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, that's
and you find these listed over and over again. They're universal.
Yeah.
And you have to stand back and look at it. What is it trying to tell us?
Indeed.
It all fits back into this idea of the cyclical nature of cataclysm, and that there is some force that's getting us ready for that time, which is incredibly near. So that's what theurgy fits into, because when men actually are able to, and this is an interesting thought, that the idea that men as theurgists somehow can cause these higher powers, angelic forces, if you will, to manifest themselves on the earth, or to intervene, or to actually maybe work with men on the earth, then men will actually parse out what it is that these previous interventions, the previous manifestations contain, the information that they contain, and then again manifest that same information in structures that they built on the earth, and in structures that they built at certain times, structures that they built in certain locations. Just like I was explaining, angelic messages actually come forth.
Come forth there, and that is, I mean, that's incredibly fascinating. And what you know, to kind of summarize here a little bit on the first segment as we begin to close off here, and then begin in the second one, we can say that with the background of what we talked about at the site that you discovered in Bolivia, Tiahuanaco, this is one place then in across the globe that we can potentially find evidence for that some beings, so to speak, have been involved in building these structures for potentially ritualistic purposes. And what you also have been mentioning a little bit is that if we look at year, we can look at dates, we can look at places in regards to latitude, longitude, we can look at place names. These all kind of incorporate into one system that is involved in a communication. And I guess a last question before we round things off here, David, would be: Is this a communication to educate us in a fashion in order to help us to get through the upcoming cataclysms, or is this an indoctrination that is going on? Do you have a take on that?
It depends on your moral alignment, I guess, because from my perspective, it only strengthens my belief system, which is a Christian paradigm. Because I see this fits into prophecy. I actually I see how this all fits into the whole scheme that has been written going back 1500 or up to 3,000 years ago. That were predictions of this cyclical system that fits right into the idea that you find in Revelation, that you find in the major prophets talking about the second advent of the Messiah. On the other hand, the force at the same time is also indoctrinating, like you say, others, because if there is an absolute, if there is a moral absolute, there's actually a belief that there is evil and there is good, and that there are forces on either side of this, then by all means, because there is a war going on, because there's a contest going on, both of these forces are going to be conveying their side of things in these theurgic manifestations, and these basically supernatural manifestations in the UFO phenomena, the crop circle phenomena. And I think also what we're seeing on the Andean plateau near Tiahuanaco, that was not perceivable until our age.
Right.
Until the QuickBird satellite took those photographs at that high resolution, and they were put on the web in April of 2007. We would never have known they were there because they're too extensive. The place is too remote. In our perspective from the ground, you can't even see that there's something there.
Right.
But from the perspective of space, it's absolutely mind-boggling how huge it is and how complex it is. And so that by itself is saying something about the timing of the event and why it was put there. it may be a big component of it. It may just be something that's an aside, but at the same time, it still fits into the theurgic sort of theory. So I think it can be both. I think it can actually be helping the faithful to grow in their faith, to push them forward in their belief. It can also be just misleading people. It can also be quite damaging when it comes to the Christian belief system and also the world system as it is right now. And that's an incredibly hot topic nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, it will be discussed when I go down to Roswell here in near the 4th of July for the CE4 conference.
Oh, okay.
You're
going back there to do another lecture?
Yeah, and it's going to be talking specifically about the Roswell message, what it means, and what really is going to happen as what the message that's actually in the ground in Roswell. What's really going to happen in 2012? What does it mean?
Right.
Why did other people who had some sort of inkling of this, even Terence McKenna, who looked at this through the I Ching,
right,
the mathematical system, was able to say, time itself will stop. How could he say such a thing?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going to address.
Oh, fascinating. And David, for people who are interested in attending that lecture, that conference, do you know a website that people can take a look at to get tickets and so forth?
Yeah, I think it's, I'd have to Google it. I Googled it myself. It's a CE4 2008, Roswell Alien Conference, Roswell UFO Conference. I guess there's also a number of sites from the promoter, Joseph Jordan, and it isn't too hard to find.
Okay.
The city of Roswell is promoting it pretty heavily too, so there's a lot of information that's on the search engine.
Perfect.
Sorry, I don't have the exact website, though.
No problem. I'll do like this. I'll do a little search for it, and once I find it, I have it up on our information page that is related to this program, so people can find that easily when they tune in here. But I've obviously tons of questions, and we have so much more to talk about. I definitely want to get into a little bit more about this 2012 thing and the overall communication, what you think is going to happen here in our next segment. I also want to ask you more about, the doomsday clock, etc. If this is considered to be, so to speak, forbidden knowledge, what the potential connection is with the so-called illuminated fraternities, and there's so much more to talk about here. But before we round things off here, David, for this segment, I want to leave the last few minutes here so you can talk a little bit about your next book, of course, but also the books that you have out there already, and how people can get copies of those who want to dive further into your work.
Gee, thank you. That's a good idea. My first book is out of print now, but I may have it reprinted. What is coming out, though, in July 1st, since you can find it on Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com, is called Temple at the Center of Time. And this focuses on the phenomena of the Jerusalem Temple and its idea of religious and actually physical centrality on this earth. Why it was put there, and why it is so revered as a location where, according to the Jewish sages, time itself starts from this point on the earth. And in fact, they say that all creation itself started from that one point on the earth where the temple used to stand. And which seems, it doesn't make much sense, unless you actually look at Isaac Newton, the founders of the idea of science itself, really believe this, and that the writings that he has that are very obscure and hardly known except for a great program that's actually come up in Cambridge called the Newton Project. You can access some of these obscure writings that he has about the temple, and some maybe not so obscure, but just not widely known, like observations on the prophecies of Daniel and St. John and chronology of ancient kingdoms. These works actually focus on the Temple of Jerusalem, and they focus on this idea that somehow the temple, architecturally,